Now that the shock has worn off, what are the chances that Michael Penix knocks our socks off?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go today, now free on the App Store or Google Play. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. I wanted to add Gordon Ramsay to the AKAs, but I haven't been cooking as late as I would like to be. But maybe at the end of the summer, with our tremendous content here on this illustrious podcast, we might add another AKA in terms of Gordon Ramsay. But I've been covering the Falcons for too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I appreciate the everydayers that go strong with me each and every day as they check it out for their first listen or first watch of the day each and every day, like an everydayer should. And if you want to become an everydayer, all you got to do, guys, is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are joined by another draft guru, analyst, expert, whatever you want to call him. He is Trevor Sikkema, PFF lead draft analyst and co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange podcast. And without further ado, let's jump into that conversation and get Trevor's thoughts on the Falcons 2024 draft class right now. Welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast with an illustrious guest. He is Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus, the head honcho, the head scouting and draft guru over there, former co-host of the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Always got to give love to the Locked On side of things. But Trevor, my friend, I asked this question to my guest yesterday, and I'll ask you the same. What was your reaction to the Michael Penix pick in the moment? And now that you've had a week to kind of let it marinate, what's your sort of reaction to it now?
Shocked, extremely shocked in the moment, right? I don't think really anybody thought that was coming. I think we had done plenty of mock drafts that had Michael Penix or other quarterback options to Atlanta before free agency. But after the Kirk Cousins signing, we thought that was dead and gone. Well, obviously it wasn't. They're doubling down to make sure that they never have to worry about quarterback, or at least they hope that they don't have to worry about quarterback for the long term and the short term. So I was very shocked in the moment when it happened. I wasn't even sure that Michael Penix was going to be a first rounder. And the closer we got to the draft, 24, 48 hours up to the draft, it felt like it was like, okay, well, he's going to be a first round pick. It's just a matter of when. I don't think anybody expected it to be at number 8 overall. So, when I've sat here and thought about it more, first of all, just very, very happy for Michael Penix Jr., the dude, right? I mean, you think of everything that he had been through, the season-ending injuries, his time at Indiana, getting back to Washington, becoming nationally relevant again, having a Heisman Trophy finalist campaign this past year. I'm just so pumped for him as an individual because it's a really cool honor to be a top 10 pick. For the Falcons specifically, I'm not one of those people on Twitter that tries to say it's all or nothing. Just because I don't agree with this pick doesn't mean there's not a world where it works out. It's not this is indefensible or there's no logic to it. No, there's some logic to it. I just think it's more plausible that they'll kind of look back on this and regret it rather the other way around. Because when I look at where this team exactly was, you sign Kirk Cousins, you go all in free agency in that regard, and you have some really nice draft assets to take control of this division, to leapfrog the Buccaneers and hopefully take control of the NFC South is what they would want to do. And you want to be a playoff team for the next couple of years. You want to maximize the Kirk Cousins window and the investment that you've had in there. And there's no way around it. Michael Penix Jr., does not do that. Like, sure, I guess he could be a spot starter for you, but who's to say that a rookie is going to be a even viable backup option for you if you needed him to come in right away? That the plan for him is not that. It's much more long-term as a starter, not a preferred backup type of a player. So I look at this team and the defensive line. I know they drafted a handful of defensive linemen, which I'm sure we'll get into, but the secondary, the cornerback room as well. I have a bad feeling that over the next 2 years, we might look at those two positions and say, man, they could have used a really talented player at number 8 overall to really help them out there. And maybe that's the difference between them becoming that playoff team and them being able to maximize what their winning window is with Kirk Cousins. So shocked, obviously like super pumped for Penix himself, but was really shocked the Falcons ended up going this direction.
Yeah, I think that's more than fair. That your sentiment is very similar to mine. I'm like, I think this could work out. I'm not necessarily willing to put a whole lot of money on it working out, but we'll see how it turns out. That's usually how the draft goes. It takes a couple of years for us to figure it out. And, essentially that's the case with Michael Penix. But you sort of mentioned that sort of opportunity cost potentially that the Falcons have had at some key issues. We'll talk about those issues, but I do want to get into, the idea of maybe the Falcons could have taken an impact player at 8, especially for their pass rush. That was a lot of things that people thought they would do going into the draft, but they didn't do that with the Penix pick. But they kind of, I guess, maybe took a scattershot approach a little bit later in the draft with their next 3 picks being pass rushers. And I know you wrote an article talking about that investment being, one of the most improved D lines coming out of the draft. And I want to break that down further with you as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So it is playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and of course, baseball season is in full swing, and FanDuel is the place where you can bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose, and you can bet on everything from slap shots, the home runs, the dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And not only can you bet on baseball, basketball, and hockey, you can, of course, bet on the upcoming NFL season with some great prop bets, right? The Falcons over under win total 9.5 wins. They have the 12th best Super Bowl odds at plus 2,400. Raheem Morris is right now the second best odds to be coach of the year at plus 1,000, right? 10-1 odds. And Kirk Cousins, 17th best MVP odds, right? If you're a believer in Kirk this year, plus 4,000, right? 40-1 odds right now to win MVP. So go check it out at FanDuel. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So before we jump into the Falcons D Line being one of the most improved units from the 2024 NFL Draft, I do want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube, free, as well as free on the Amazon Fire TV channels app, where you're getting that can't miss analysis, opinions, and news across the entire sports landscape that only Locked On can provide. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Trevor, you wrote for PFF in the last couple of days since the draft, always with the analysis, post-draft. You did a breakdown of various teams and units that were among the most improved units as well as the least improved units. But let's start with that positive, talking about the Falcons D line being one of the most improved units from this draft class. The Falcons invested 4 picks in that area, getting Ruke Orhorhoro out of Clemson in round 2, Bralen Trice out of Washington in round 3, Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon in round 4, and then Zion Logue out of Georgia in round 6. So clearly the Falcons kind of took, hey, we could take, as I mentioned before, maybe they could have taken an impact player at 8 there, but instead they're going with 4 pieces. Is 4 guys better than 1 in your opinion? How do you sort of look at that improvement that the Falcons may or may not have made on the D-line?
I don't know which strategy is going to be better, whether it's the numbers or the player at the top of the draft. I guess time will tell in that regard, but it did. I like some of the players they brought in, and it's funny, if it was players in a different order, I might have liked it a little bit better. But at the end of the day, they're coming away with three guys specifically who I think can have a rotational impact on this team. Zion Logue, we'll see, right? It's a much later draft pick, so there's no guarantee that he's going to be a depth or rotational player. But Trice, I think, is a stand-up outside linebacker for Raheem Morris 4-3 defense, or sorry, 3-4 defense. Obviously, Brandon Dorlus and Ruke Orhorhoro, those are two guys who, to me, have a lot of versatility. They were kind of seen as these tweener players. Okay, they're like in between weight. Okay, they're not technically big enough to play 3 tech. They're not, fast enough or athletic enough for at least the prototypical build of like a 5 technique defensive end. So where do they really match up? But I think Raheem Morris over the last handful of years has done a good job using those guys in very, very versatile ways. So I have faith that he can figure out how to put those guys in really good positions. But again, I don't want to sound like a broken record continuing to go back to the number 8 overall pick, but what they did drafting 3 straight defensive linemen, sure, you could tell yourself you're going for best player available. And again, there's a world where it works out, but were you just continuing to prioritize defensive line to try to make up for the fact that you didn't draft one at 8? And now we're sitting here, the draft has basically come and gone. And I know we'll get to this later, but now you don't really have a suitable starting outside corner or even depth corner for this team where I thought you needed to get better anyways. So for those guys, I like Dorlus. He was somebody who I thought that they got great value for drafting him in day 3. I felt like he was a fringe late 2nd, early 3rd round player. Unique quickness for his size. He could play him anywhere from a 3 technique to a 5 technique, including that 4-eye for an odd front. Orhorhoro, really athletic interior defensive lineman. Doesn't totally know what he's doing yet from a pass rush perspective, but like even when he just wins off athleticism, that's encouraging. I think the way that he wins at the next level, he just needs to get better at his technique. And then Trice, I think Trice is kind of a streamlined pass rusher. Like he created a lot of havoc and got a lot of total pressures when he was at Washington. But if you watch, they put him in pretty advantageous situations where he's a wide 9 rusher and he's just taking a straight line towards the quarterback. He's often just going straight into the chest of offensive tackles, pushing them back. And a lot of those pressures come from him collapsing the pocket and forcing a quarterback to move. He's not necessarily beating the guy to his outside or inside shoulder and really getting to the quarterback cleanly for those sacks. That's the next step in his evolution. So I don't mind the selections that they made with those players. But again, I think it all comes back to number 8. Are you drafting 3 of these guys in a row because you're trying to supplement not getting one at number 8? I think that's just unfortunately the conversations that you have to have.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Now, you talked a little bit about all 3 of these guys, and I know you wrote another piece about who's the favorite pick for each team in the draft, and you had Brandon Dorlus, the Falcons' 4th round selection, and it made sense, at least when I sort of checked where the Falcons were picking players and where PFF's final big board had guys ranked. He was the only guy that was picked after where he was ranked, so I guess technically the only steal from the Falcons' 8 picks. Do you look at Dorlus as the guy of this group because you maybe had him rated a little bit higher than Orhorhoro and Bralen Trice as the guy that you think can maybe make the most impact as a rookie? Or do you feel like all 3 of these guys have a chance with Raheem Morris calling plays?
Yeah, it kind of depends, right? It's sort of, a scenario when you're in the draft where the guys who get drafted higher tend to get the early opportunities, right? And so I can sit here and tell you, hey, I like Dorlus quite a bit. I liked him as much, if not better, than Orhorhoro in a lot of different scenarios. The Falcons might be one of them, but Ruke is somebody that they traded up for in the 2nd round, and Dorlus was a 4th round pick for them. So I think when it comes to that versatile interior defensive lineman, Ruke is going to get the first crack at really being that type of a player along their defensive line. I mean, obviously, they've got some good players still on the defensive line. Onyemata, Grady Jarrett is still there, right? Zach Harrison obviously is a bigger bodied player who can play as kind of like a hand in the dirt, strong side end for you. So there's guys on that roster who you can field that starting 4 without having to dip into the rookie class. But I feel as though Orhorhoro would be that next man up if he were to make that starting rotation. But I really I think that Dorlus is going to flash for him. Like, I think that we could absolutely see a world where training camp, preseason, like this guy is playing really good ball because he was able to when he was at the Senior Bowl. I thought he did this past year as well. And if he continues to hone in on himself as a pass rusher, I think he can he can really overwhelm some of those, especially second and third team players that he'll probably go up against in training camp and preseason. So I see him being a potential fan favorite of a guy who you go, hey, let's get this guy more reps somehow. Let's get this guy into the starting rotation or just in the defensive line rotation overall. So I do like Dorlus. I like him a lot. I liked him going into this past season from the summertime. I saw a lot of versatility to him, and I think he could be a really good player for a versatile Raheem Morris defensive front.
Yeah, and on that note, he often gets labeled, Brandon Dorlus, that is, as a tweener, right? I'm just curious, where do you kind of stand on that? Do you like the fact that he can play both inside and outside, or do you feel like it's best when you come to try to develop these guys in the league to kind of find a singular role that kind of stands out that that player can do? How do you sort of value the whole tweener conversation around Brandon Dorlus?
He was an interior defensive lineman. He was a defensive tackle for his first couple of years that he was at Oregon. And I thought he was fine. And then he lost a bunch of weight and he played more DN, but Oregon still ran a lot of odd front stuff. So it wasn't as much like true edge rusher as it was like 3-4 defensive end. And so he was playing like between 280, 285 this past year. And when he was at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, that's kind of around where he weighed. But I'd rather him be closer to 290 and play that 3 technique defensive tackle. I would like for him to be an interior defensive lineman because his most advantageous skill set to me is how quick he is off the ball, his handwork, and just like the violence that he has in his first punch at contact. Like all that stuff to me lends itself to really giving guards fits on the inside. Whereas if you put him up against offensive tackles, I just think the length of tackles and the speed of tackles, like it just mitigates a lot of that stuff that he would be bringing to the table. So I would rather him play closer to 290 pounds and be more of that true interior defensive lineman. You can still be versatile. Like you could still play a 2-eye, a 4-eye, a 3 technique, and you could still set up in a lot of different spots. But I would rather him be more of an interior player than play between, 275, 280 and be this like 4-eye to 5 technique player. I just don't think that he's going to have as much of an advantage there if he does that.
That's fair. So we talked about the Falcons' most improved unit. Let's talk about their least improved unit in terms of the cornerback position, and we'll break that down to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, guys, whether you're reeling from the Falcons draft or you want to celebrate the Falcons draft, you're going to need your friends more than ever. And Monopoly Go is the place to go where you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you can work together, build up each other's boards, and the more you win together, the more awesome prizes that you can win, such as unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces, hilarious emojis that you can use to taunt your friends when you smash their building or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench, join your friends, and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Again, check out Monopoly Go for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Now I'm here with Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focused. And let's talk about, we've already kind of touched upon this, the Falcons kind of ignoring the cornerback position. Did that surprise you coming out of the draft that the Falcons didn't even draft a single cornerback, let alone maybe a late round pick or something just to get another body in the building?
Yeah, it really did, especially when you look at their projected starting lineup. I believe, it's AJ Terrell. He's locking down one of those spots. It's Mike Hughes in the nickel. They have D Alford as well. It's Clark Phillips on the outside, but I thought that they would draft a corner within either round 1 or round 2, to be honest with you. Like I thought we were going to hit corner pretty early here for the Falcons. They don't hit it at all. So, are we going to get in a situation where if this team's given up a lot of passing yards per game, again, that's just, it's more fuel on the fire to go, what were you doing at 8? Like you could have even traded back and got yourself Terrell Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell or Cooper DeJean or Nate Wiggins or whoever it was. And maybe that wasn't the right path, but it makes it harder to say like, yeah, the guy that we drafted at 8 is not going to contribute at all whatsoever for us this year. It's tough when you look at the corner room the way that it is right now, especially with AJ Terrell's contract situation, right? We assume that he's going to be back with the Falcons. We assume that he's going to be there long-term. You don't want to let those coverage guys get out of the building. But like what happened this offseason with Calvin Ridley and the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jags were always going to bring back Calvin Ridley. Like they were always good. He was in their plans. And then all of a sudden, they tried to kind of get cute with some of the trade, the compensation that they were going to get back from Atlanta for the trade for him. And so then, he hits free agency, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, Tennessee comes in with this monster offer that they never saw coming, and boom, now Calvin Ridley's gone. So you never know what's going to happen. And if you take AJ Terrell off of this team, holy cow, is their corner room thin. I mean, it's already thin with him there. So I am very shocked that they did not address corner. And for a team that is legitimately trying to get over the hump and go win a division and to crown themselves at the top of the NFC South and get back to the playoffs, that is a glaring area where even if they were to win the division, because the NFC South isn't as strong as it has been in years past, to go into the playoffs with that kind of a cornerback room, it's hard to see them going on any sort of a run at all. And I just wish that they would have had somebody that they could have drafted there to invest in. I like Clark Phillips, but I think that his size limits his effectiveness as an outside corner. And I wonder if he's got that shiftiness to truly be able to lock down a starting nickel job. I'd rather have him play nickel, even though he played outside when he was at Utah. And so I don't know if they have a lot of starting viable options on the outside opposite AJ Terrell, which to me is concerning.
I think that's more than fair. Let's talk a little bit about the day 3 picks. We've already talked a little bit about Brandon Dorlus, but any of the other day 3 picks to you stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a good class on day 3. I really do. Obviously headlined by Dorlus, who was drafted a lot later than where I had him in my big board. I had him 65th overall on my big board, and they get him 109. I like JD Bertrand. I think he is a very smart, really good communicator as a Mike linebacker that we've seen for Notre Dame over the last couple of years. So his competitiveness, I think, is going to allow him to be a depth player on this roster, a special teams player, that kind of stuff. Jace McClellan, I felt it was a really good, all around back. Now, he didn't do anything, in my opinion, that was really separating himself from the pack. And it's hard to draft players high at that position, a position that just has so many good running backs coming in year after year out. You don't really prioritize that. But once you draft them on your team, wherever it is you draft them, you go, this guy's pretty decent. And that's kind of what I think of when I look at Jace McClellan is I do think that he is a good overall back. I just don't think he had these traits that were going to separate him to allow him to get drafted higher. Casey Washington, I was shocked that he was drafted above his teammate, Isaiah Williams from Illinois. But Washington was somebody who, I'm not going to lie, so I was at the Shrine Bowl practices in Dallas back in January. And the offenses and practices kept prioritizing getting the ball to Casey Washington. And I was like, really? I mean, Isaiah Williams was also at that event. And so was Malik Washington and Taj Washington. And I kept seeing Casey Washington get the ball. And so that to me speaks a lot to what he could bring as a depth wide receiver and special teams receiver, because even in a limited amount of time that he worked with those coaches there, they wanted to get him the football. And then Logue, I mean, you draft Zion Logue to be a depth defensive lineman, comes from one of the best programs in college football, one of the deepest defensive lines in college football. And you just hope that he can be that depth defensive lineman for you at the NFL level as well.
Well, Trevor, I appreciate your insight into all 8 of these draft picks for the Atlanta Falcons. We'll obviously be paying close attention here on Locked On Falcons to see how they turn out. And I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it so that you can sit there and say, I called the Brandon Dorlus 10-sack season 3 years ago or whatever it is. But let the people know, what are you working on currently over at PFF? What the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, which I forgot to plug at the beginning, but of course is a great show with you and Connor Rogers. What are you guys working on in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, so doing a lot of analysis, obviously, on what was the 2024 NFL draft, talking about fits and expectations for a lot of these players. Then we'll take a couple of weeks off, but then we'll fire things back up really beginning of June and get back into that summer scouting, take a look at who could be next up in college football, the 2025 NFL draft class. Where is it strong? Where is it weak? The guys that you want to pay attention to, all that good stuff. So if you're into some forward thinking content when it comes to the summer months before we get into training camp and preseason, come hang out with us over on the Stock Exchange podcast as we talk about some of the future guys who'll get drafted in 2025.
Absolutely. Cannot recommend summer scouting series that they do every summer enough, guys. It is great to get you kind of just wet the whistle for the upcoming 2024 college football season and upcoming 2025 draft season. But Trevor, once again, really appreciate you joining me on today's Locked On Falcons.
Appreciate it, Aaron. Anytime, my friend.
So, guys, that is going to do it for us here on today's illustrious pod. Appreciate Trevor for joining me. Appreciate DP for joining me yesterday, getting some outside perspective on the Falcons draft class. And I'm sure these won't be the last times we get some outside perspective on the Falcons draft class over the coming weeks. Of course, we have a summer of tremendous content. We'll be talking a little bit more about, the decision to pick Penix now that we have a little bit more information coming off of the heels of Kyle Smith, the assistant general manager's press conference earlier this week. And we'll probably get into that potentially tomorrow. Of course, we'll also be getting more into Penix for the Locked On Falcons insiders, who now, as you guys are probably checking this out, probably have access to a brand new film breakdown of Michael Penix. That's probably, over an hour of content looking at his skill set. And for those of you that aren't Locked On Falcons insiders, there will be the breakdown I did of Michael Penix looking at the film from his matchup against Michigan in the national championship game. I'm taking that behind the paywall, right? I did that at the end of January, and you guys will now get access to that for free, now. And, if you enjoy that, just think, you're getting 10 times as much analysis moving forward on Michael Penix. So you can also check out that new breakdown for free, right? Because there's a 14-day free trial if you sign up to be a Locked On Falcons insider today, and then you pay $4.99 a month. It's great value for you guys, and we'll be breaking down all 8 of the Falcons draft picks in terms of film study as well as on the pod. So if we're going to probably do the film stuff before we get into the detailed scouting report on the podcast. Like I'm hoping for my Michael Penix breakdown at the end of next week, but you can sort of get my initial thoughts right now by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. And not only do you get access to that, you can also get, whatever musings. You can get sort of half-baked ideas that I get, right? Where, like, for the insiders, they get my thoughts on things before they come on the pods. Like, you get, if you listen to podcasts, you're getting mostly fully formed ideas, but the Locked On Falcons insiders get kind of the half-baked ones. And it doesn't mean that half-baked and bad. It's just like, it's in the oven. We're checking the oven. We're just seeing, okay, it's cooking, right? Like, it's mostly cooking, and we're just going to check on it. I'm just going to throw it out there to the Locked On Falcons insiders, and they can sort of just double check if this is in the right direction, in the right ballpark. And of course, your half-baked ideas, you can bounce off of me. There's plenty of guys that are Locked On Falcons insiders that sort of say, Aaron, what do you think about this? And sometimes they say, I think that makes sense. Or sometimes they're like, no, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But that is the type of discourse that you can have as a Locked On Falcons insider, in addition to getting all the film analysis that I'm going to do this summer for the draft picks, as well as the upcoming 2024 season, as well as my film analysis from last season with the all 22 review. So if you're still reluctant to sign up to become a Locked On Falcons insider, I don't know what you're doing, guys. It's, again, you can try it for 2 weeks. If you like it, great. You can keep it rolling. If you don't like it, then hey, no fuss, no muss, all that stuff. So that is it, guys. I hope you have a great weekend here on the Locked On Falcons podcast, as well as the Locked On Podcast Network. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL Scouting, Locked On NFL. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every